Hello, everybody, and welcome to Coffee Class with Young Screenwriters.
Hello.
Today, we have a very special guest joining us, Nathan Graham Davis.
Hey
Thank
everyone,
you.
thanks for having me. I'm psyched to be here. Been looking forward to this.
Thanks so much for joining us. So, for those of you who might not yet know Nathan Graham Davis, he is a professional and produced screenwriter. And today we're going to be chatting about breaking in and about the craft of screenwriting in general. So, Nathan, do you want to just tell us a little bit about your journey as a writer? I know that
Sure.
you said your series on YouTube is about breaking back in, right? So
Yeah, so I have a series on YouTube called Reentry that I started in mid 2020, following me trying to break back into screenwriting. And I did that for about 6 months, and now I'm just starting a new one called Going Pro. So now I am a professional screenwriter, which feels amazing to say. But I'm like a newbie professional screenwriter, and so there's all these new things to learn. It's been really interesting, really eye-opening, a lot of fun, also very challenging. So it's just feels like something that's also worth documenting. But yeah, I've been doing this forever. I wrote my first screenplay when I was like 20, and then I just knew that was what I wanted to do immediately. I was taking a community college course, and like it was an online community college screenwriting course. I was working at Blockbuster at the time, and I wrote my entire first feature within like 2 months of that course. And I was like, this is just what I love. It's what I want to do. And so I just kept going. And I experimented with directing too, was making music videos, but ultimately focused on the writing side. But it took me 7 or 8 years just to I think, get good enough to where my writing was at a professional level. I broke in once with an action thriller when I was about 28. And that got me my first manager. We optioned it to a pretty big time producer. It got me a ton of meetings, but I was never able to kind of translate that into a career. I wasn't able to, make a whole lot more money. I worked on a lot of things for free for people because I think I was naive enough to take the bait on some of those things that I probably shouldn't have. And I had two little kids at the time. So after a couple of years of that, I just decided that wasn't the type of life that I wanted to live anymore. It was getting really frustrating. I didn't really know enough to know that that's normal when you break in. It is really hard for a while. And so I just ducked out and I decided to focus on my day job. And I wrote things for me. I wrote a graphic novel. Jack Purcell, who's done a lot of DC and Marvel work, he did the art on it, and we self-published it, and that was a blast. Wrote a bunch of short stories, and I was pretty happy with that. But then 2020 rolled around, and suddenly we're in a pandemic. It feels like the country is more divided than ever. There's all this awful racial tension going on, and it just was ugly. And you start thinking okay, is the end of the world coming? So what do I want to do with my life? And I just realized I really, really wanted to write movies and make movies. So I decided to jump back in with everything I had, and have been going hard at it ever since. And so, yeah, last summer I optioned a script. I signed with my manager. That script got made and produced in May or June. It still hasn't been announced yet. That announcement's going to be coming probably around February, but it'll be released next year. And I've got 2 other movies in the works, so I've been keeping pretty busy.
That's awesome. Well, congratulations.
That was probably the longer version of what you wanted to hear.
No, that was the short version. That was the
short version. Yeah. So when you were talking about that you broke in before, you were talking about that you landed a manager, right? That's kind of, I know that I watched some other interviews that you've done, and you were talking about kind of the difference in your mind between what is breaking in and what is finding success in the field, and kind of how do those things compare? Could you maybe speak to that for a second?
Yeah. So you're wondering how I would define breaking in and
yeah,
success?
yeah.
Okay. Sure. I mean, that's a good question. I think you ask a bunch of different writers, you're going to get a bunch of different answers. For me, breaking in, I always defined as basically getting really legitimate, solid representation and getting paid to work, with Hollywood companies. And so I did achieve that first time around, but it never kind of generated enough momentum to where I could kind of keep that going for real and turn it into a career, and so I think success for me, I've always kind of defined as being able to make that my day job and being able to support my family as a screenwriter. And so um, I'm steadily moving toward doing that. And 2023, I'm going to give that a shot for real. It still feels tight to do that and a little risky, but it's exciting to be really moving toward that after all these years. So it's really fun and very grateful. I've got an incredibly supportive wife and family that goes a really long way.
That's amazing. So what kind of stuff about like your mental space or like what you were doing, what's changed for you since the first time that you've broken in? I imagine it's a lot, but
yeah, that's a good question. So I am much more disciplined now than I was 10 years ago, which was basically the first time. Um, a lot of that, frankly, I've picked up a lot of skills through my day job, which is in the financial industry, that I never intended to pick up. This was actually always supposed to be like the day job until I, became a full-time screenwriter or filmmaker or whatever. From the time that I was like 23 when I got into this field. And when I started really focusing on it, I learned a ton about in order to be successful at it and continue to advance in my career and everything. I learned a lot about leadership and discipline and business and sales and all sorts of things that have honestly been incredibly helpful to me as a writer. And when you wouldn't really think of those as qualities that help, but they've been really useful, especially because like I've still been managing a day job this entire time, and I've got my family, and it's really important to me with my kids at the ages that they're at that I get to spend lots of time with them. Want to spend time with my wife and my parents, and so I need to be disciplined in order to do the work that I need to do to be successful at my writing and also have that type of life that I want to have. So I think that's the main thing, is just becoming more disciplined. And that's been massive.
What does that look like for you? Like when you say you're more disciplined now?
So I journal every single morning. I've been doing that for like 4.5 years without missing a day, which is just kind of like reflecting on the day before and kind of where I'm at, discoveries I've made, what I want to accomplish. And it's just really a good way to kind of like check the temperature and gauge where I'm at and what I need to do. And it's important for me as I'm like planning out the next day. And it's really just about taking it a day at a time and focusing on what I can do in the space of a single day to kind of just move the needle a little bit closer to whatever my goals are. And then for those same 4.5 years, I've been making a list of 5 tasks that I need to accomplish every single day in order to move closer to those goals. And they're not all writing related, but usually 2 of them are. It might be like write for 90 minutes and read 40 pages of this screenplay, and things like that. By sticking to those and crossing that list off every day, and there are days where I don't get it all done, but most days I do. And just the habit of making that list every day has been incredible. And it's been a really life-changing habit for me.
That's awesome. That's really cool. So that kind of connects to, I saw your most recent YouTube video, which everyone should check out, on the Going Pro series. And you had your 5 big goals. Is that kind of connected? I wrote them down. You're working on it. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. Finish your question. Or?
I was just going to share what they were for people. I think you said you were working on a current spec. You're doing a rewrite on Aether, right? Which is you're doing a short. You're developing a pitch and an outline, and you're going to try to meet 20 people, which I think that's the most daunting one for me.
But so like the 20 people, so these are all kind of larger goals, right? And they're all pointing toward the biggest goal of just having a sustainable career as a screenwriter and producer. But those, breaking it down into those goals and saying, okay, these are the things I need to accomplish in X amount of time, that's useful. So that then, like, when I'm thinking in the morning, okay, what do I need to do today? I need to meet somebody in the next week. So I might say, I'm going to like fire off 3 emails or whatever and saying, hey, like, let's grab coffee or Zoom or whatever. And like, that would be a task that I would put on that list. Like, send 3 emails to try and set up a meeting or something. And, you know, when I'm working on this rewrite for Aether. So it's like rewriting is like a big part of that is just kind of taking in the notes and the conversations that you've had with the producers and thinking through that and trying to incorporate that. So there's a lot of like thinking work that isn't necessarily generating pages, right? So I'm not going to have a page count goal, but I know that I need to do work. And so I might say, like, part of like that task list might be like, spend, you know, 60 minutes, like going through the notes and thinking through them. And just having a list like that and just focusing on that every day has been super, super helpful. Does that make sense?
Oh, totally. Yeah. Absolutely. And I think that we have Theo in the comments saying, this speaks to me so heavily. I'm so goal-oriented lately, and I've seen such a difference this year, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a super goal-oriented person. You know, with kind of everything, it's really helpful for me to, like, you know, have a goal if in any area of my life where I want to be successful in. Like, so, you know, even with like trying to like keep up my fitness, which has taken a little bit of a backseat in the last couple of years. I used to be like a really kind of big ultra runner, and you know, I still run and ride and stuff like that, but not to the same extent. And I realized, like, I need to set a goal for 2023, some sort of race or something, just to like kind of like have my head in that space so that I'm focused there too. So yeah, I mean, I totally relate to that, Theo. I'm super goal oriented as well.
So when you're meeting people, just side question, you, I assume, have a spreadsheet or like systems in place for like keeping track of those meetings, or is that a part of the goal setting?
Yeah. I'm not as good about that as I would like to be. I do have a spreadsheet. To tell you the truth, I hate tracking that kind of thing. I just like, I'm really bad about updating that stuff. Like, I love like the process of meeting people, but it is useful to capture like notes and things like that, just so that you can come back to that later if you ever need to. And like, I'm dealing with weird screenwriting money stuff now. And so like, I have an accountant who's like, you need to track how much you spend every time you grab coffee or lunch with somebody in relation to this, so that, you know, at the end of the year, I can help you deduct that. And so like, you know, so I do need to start like tracking this stuff really, really well. But like, that's something I haven't been as good about.
It's tough. I'm not a spreadsheet person, but I know that Adam, you're much more loggy, right? You'll like.
I've taught myself that skill.
Yeah.
Because so without it, my life's a dumpster.
Here's an interesting question from Varvara. So how do you complete these 5 tasks when you have no inspiration or in a bad mood? Do you just continue? Like, do you just push yourself through, or do you have other keys?
That's such a good question, because I totally relate to that. You know, I even mentioned in a video that I did at one point, like how depression is something I've struggled with off and on. You know, when that hits, it's super challenging to kind of force yourself to stay motivated and do those things. I have stuck with that journaling every single day. So even like on the days where I'm really like struggling or whatever, I journal in the morning, and like at least I'm kind of like taking that mental space for myself, which I think that alone is really helpful. There are days where, like, frankly, like, I don't get everything done that I mean to get done. And that's part of the reason why. But one thing that I started doing pretty regularly, like a year and a half ago, I was doing a rewrite on the movie that got made. And I was really, really struggling with some of the notes from the producers. I just wasn't getting them. But I wanted to stay on the movie. You know, I didn't want them to hire another writer because I couldn't deliver. And so, you know, there were like 2 weeks where like I wasn't getting any real good work done. I was just sitting in front of my computer and not coming up with anything that worked. And so what I started doing was just like visualizing myself walking into a theater with my family and like getting popcorn and then like walking into the actual movie theater and seeing like the title of the movie up on like the board there and sitting down and family and friends are all around and then like lights go down and written by Nathan Graham Davis comes up on the screen and like kind of like just taking like a couple minutes to visualize that every day for a few days really somehow like unlocked that motivation in me again and got me focused on like this is like what I've been working toward, you know, like just kind of like this is the dream and I've got an opportunity right now. So I have to find a way to do it. And it really helped. And I did figure it out. And, you know, I was able to understand where the producers were coming from on these notes. And I found a way to make it work. And I stayed on the movie. So it sounds like I'm going to have sole credit on it, which is pretty cool.
That's awesome.
That's a big deal. That's great.
I'm going to definitely give that a shot, by the way.
Yeah. Could you tell us like the process of this, the first script that has took off for you in this second period, re-entry period? What was the process of connecting that to producers who wanted to make it?
So there are going to be people who like this answer and people who absolutely hate it. I threw it, it's an older script, and I put it up on the blacklist. And I did it because I put my newer script up on the blacklist and I was pissed because it got like a couple 7s. And like, I still think that's the best thing I've written. And so I was like, this was a script that had some success in the past. And so I put it up on the blacklist just to prove them all wrong. And it did really well. And so like I tweeted about it. And I was very specific when I tweeted about it. So I like tweeted, I screenshotted all 4 pages of the blacklist review, including weaknesses. And I put the log line in the tweet and I said, you know, like super excited to, you know, finally get that 8 or whatever. Put the log line in there. And then I said, get at me, Hollywood, let's make this thing. And it got retweeted a bunch. Shout out John Zazerny, who's not my manager, but is a super awesome guy. We've connected many times since. He retweeted it for me, which kind of helped it blow up a lot. And it got tons and tons of downloads on the blacklist page. I got a ton of DMs. I got a ton of emails. I mean, it must have been read 50, 60 times by industry professionals. And my manager was one of the people who downloaded it. He reached out to me and said, hey, I know exactly where to take this script. I need to do it now because of the timing. We can talk later, but are you okay with me doing that? And I said, yeah, go for it. So he did, and he was right. And I had an option offer within 3 weeks, and the movie was being produced or was in production like 10 months later. So it was pretty incredible.
That's
awesome.
That's amazing. That's so fast. So
yeah,
what about that story? Just so for the people who might not know, what about that is the thing that people don't like?
I think a lot of people. So first of all, like the blacklist is not like a magic bullet. Like, you know, there are lots of people who do very well on there, and it doesn't lead to success. And so I think, rightly so, there are a lot of people who are really frustrated with this whole like screenwriting success industry, right? There are lots of companies, lots of contests out there, and most of them are absolutely worthless. Blacklist is actually a really good one, but even so, it's like, you know, most people are not going to find success through it. It's just one thing that can work sometimes, and it worked really, really well for me.
And you leveraged Twitter.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the other thing is like, you can't just expect Hollywood to come to you, you know, like you have to like put yourself out there. And that can be scary. But you got to do it. Especially in this world. Like the first time that's another thing. The first time that I broke in, it was already incredibly hard. There were tons of people doing this, but now it's harder for sure. There are more people doing it. I don't know if it's because of the pandemic. Like a lot more people said, you know, I want to write. I don't know if it's because, things like Script Notes podcast became super popular and that inspired people. I have no idea, but there are more people writing now than ever. And, there aren't more movies getting made. Hollywood makes maybe 700 a year, and then not even twice as many in terms of shows. And that's contracting now. So it is hard. You have to put yourself out there. Contests in the blacklist can be great. Query letters still work, but you have to do more than that. You have to just kind of try everything.
So you did that. I know that a lot of our community is not based in LA or New York. You did this from outside of those places, right?
Yeah, I live in Western Massachusetts in a town with like 17,000 people. So it's a pretty small area. It's an artsy area, but when I started out, I didn't know anybody in the business. I made my first like real contact probably 2.5, 3 years in. So, I just kind of was figuring it out as I went. I bought Robert McKee's book Story, a couple other books, and just kept writing. And, if you think of it as a long game and you're willing to put in a decade or whatever, you can meet a ton of people in that time. It's kind of like, I think people focus on how much can they write in that amount of time. But if you think about, like, you also do need to have some sort of network. How many people can you meet in that time? And if you think about it that way, it becomes less scary, I think.
For sure. Absolutely.
So, so let's pivot a little bit to screenwriting. You were talking a bit earlier before we started this call, concept is king. What do you have to say about that in terms of like?
Yeah. So, so concept is king. Like so as I said when we were chatting, like I feel like there are all these kind of like writer truisms that if you boil them down to 3 or 4 words, which is usually what happens, you lose a lot of the nuance that's actually really important. But like concept does matter so much. Especially when you're trying to break in, because of all that noise I just spoke about. There are so many people trying to do this. People want to read a 1 to 2 sentence log line that sparks them immediately, and they're like, "Oh, that's a movie. I haven't seen it before. I can see how that could make a whole lot of money." And that's how you get reads when you're, especially when you're trying to break in. It's not the only way you get reads, but it sure helps. However, you still need to be really good, and you still need to be really passionate about whatever it is that you're writing. Like, I think concept can get your foot in the door almost on its own with a good log line, but it's certainly not going to keep it there if the writing isn't great, and also if like the passion isn't on the page. If the voice isn't there, that's not going to help you stay on a project. It's not going to help you get additional work or like have people passing your scripts around, and meeting more people. All that stuff really matters. And so, yeah, concept matters. And I do think that one mistake that a lot of writers make is they don't put enough time into finding the right concept. But like, you don't just write something because it feels marketable. Make sure that it's something that you're really excited about and that you're willing to stick with for a year, however long it takes you to get through a bunch of drafts until it's that good that it's worth putting out there.
So I know that this is a question we get a lot. How do you know when you have the concept that you should be writing? Like when you're trying to sit there and you're brainstorming a bunch of ideas, how do you know when you've hit it?
That's hard. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a gut instinct to some extent, especially when you're starting out. I think it again comes down to like there has to be a real passion element. You have to be super excited about it. And ideally, if your goal is to break in, you're going to find something that you're really excited about. And you're like, yeah, I see this movie. I can't wait to start writing it. But also, you see how it kind of fits into the things that are getting made right now and that are doing well. And there's a wide variety of things that are getting made and doing well, but there are also lots of things that aren't, or there are things that are played out. And, I mean, just think about it from your perspective. Like, if you saw that trailer come up, would you be super excited by it? Or would you be like, oh man, like, you know, I've already seen 5 zombie movie trailers this year. I don't know if I could stomach another. You know, like that type of thing. But it is tricky, and it's challenging now. So, you know, I signed with my manager, and we were trying to figure out the next thing for me to write, and we spent probably almost 3 months just going back and forth trying to figure out the concept for the right thing until we finally found something where it was like I was super excited about it, and he felt like there was a really good chance he could sell it, or at least get a ton of people to read it, so that I was taking meetings everywhere. But it took a really, really long time to get there, and I'm not sure if that's always the way that I want to work, honestly. But I am really excited to be working with my manager. He's fantastic, and so it was important to me to trust his process, at least on this first one, and kind of see where that takes things. And so that's been our strategy. Is like we haven't taken anything out wide yet. I've got 3 things going, but that's all kind of happened like on an individual level. And so we wanted to have like a really big spec that would kind of work in the same brand space and that he could take out wide. And so it took us a long time to find that concept. But when we did, it's a real winner. I mean, I've bounced it off some close friends, and everybody's like, oh, you know, that's home run. So we'll see. But I'm glad I put the time in, and I'm glad I trusted my manager's advice to do that.
When you're, yeah, you go, Lexi.
I was going to say, out of curiosity, like, how have the concepts that you've been drawn to kind of changed over the years as you've gotten to know like your own voice and like yourself as a writer?
That's a good question. Definitely, they definitely have. One thing I find myself really interested in these days are like research heavy concepts, like whether there's some like scientific element that I really need to research, or historical element. Historical's tricky. Anytime it's a period piece, you know, there are a lot of people who are going to be scared about that, because period pieces are more expensive to make. But I do have one that has producers attached, at least right now, so it's not impossible. And those are, I mentioned it in that video, but Ben Lustig and Jake Thornton, the writers, they're starting to produce now. And they just had a period piece made this summer. So The Princess, if you haven't seen it. So, you know, it does happen. It's just, it can be challenging. But I like things that require a lot of research. I enjoy that process, and just kind of really, like, I like world building, and that's kind of a grounded way to do it when there's something that kind of maybe the general public has a very small idea about, and you can kind of bring them into that. You are still world building, but you're doing it in a way that exists in the real world, or at least something adjacent to that.
If you don't mind, I love world building, so I'd love to ask you a little bit more about your process for that. So, like, you were just talking about that you like this kind of world building that's grounded in like real concepts. When you come into something like that, are you coming in with like a specific story idea already, or is it more like, I'm super interested in Vikings and I want to find out the story I can tell with them? Or like, what's kind of your way into the world and the story?
I think it could be both. Actually, so I have an idea right now, and I don't even have the story idea yet. There's just like a subject that I know there. I am convinced there's a movie in there, or maybe it's a limited series. I don't know, but there's something in there, and I'm going to find it. And so I've already bought books, and I've been kind of just reading on the side, you know, like 10, 15 pages a day in that subject while I'm working on my other things, just trusting that some sort of idea will come out. But I think usually it's concept first. Like, I'll find a concept and I'll be like, oh, that's fun. I want to explore that. And I like world building of all sorts. My dad was playing Dungeons and Dragons with me when I was like 6. You know, that's just been part of my life ever since then. You know, it's certainly harder to get things with swords and dragons and things made than something that's a little bit more grounded and lower budget these days. And I don't mean that you have to shoot super low budget, but if you start getting north of $50-60 million, there aren't a lot of places making those, and certainly not off of original specs.
That was my problem when I was first starting, always writing the big budget stuff.
And that directly relates to this question.
Exactly.
Do you agree that a first time writers should write with a certain budget in mind?
Yeah, so that's a good question. There's a lot of advice out there that you should write really low budget scripts when you're trying to break in. And I sort of get where that's coming from. There's certainly less risk involved with making a lower budget movie. However, I was kind of surprised to find that the sci-fi thriller that I wrote specifically so that maybe I could even produce it for like under $2 million. When I signed with my manager, he was like, we talked about that one, and he really liked the script a lot. And he's like, this isn't the type of thing that we can take out wide. There are very few buyers that are looking for something that small. I mean, these are the type of things that they get built from the ground up at a very small indie level. But you're not going to take it out to production companies and studios because that's not what they're looking for. They want something bigger that they can bring bigger stars into and kind of like, that'll feel larger in scope. So that was interesting. I hadn't really heard that before, except it made sense to me because when I had written this script a few years back, a bunch of my friends had sent it to their reps and things, and nobody would even read it. And these were like WJ writers sending it to their reps. And now I kind of understand why. I think there is, if in terms of trying to break into Hollywood, at least, there is too small. So what's cool is that script is actually moving forward now. We've got producers and directors attached, and we've got equity financing, and we just made offers to like A-list actors. But part of the process of getting there was working with the directors this spring and turning it from like a $2 million movie into like a $5 to $6 million movie. So it's still very close to what I wrote. It just feels a little bit bigger in scope. So anyway, to answer the question, I think thinking about budget's not a bad thing. Like if you're making, some huge superhero movie, it's going to be really tough to get that to do anything for you. There is a sweet spot, and it kind of depends on genre, but that like $5 to $20 million space is a really good space to be in. If you're specifically focused on Hollywood, because places are making movies at those scales, and they're big enough, but they're still small enough that there are many buyers. Whereas once you kind of start getting north of that, the number of buyers just is vastly reduced, and so it's harder to break in with something like that.
That is great advice. Sort of like that sweet spot of not micro budget, but
I still feel like I got to qualify all this. So like Jake and Ben, who I was just talking about, like they've never written anything in like the $10 million space. All their stuff is big, like 40, 50, $80 million. And they've had a fantastic career. And people, do manage to, so passion counts for a lot, and what you care about counts for a lot. I still don't think you should write a $100 million superhero movie, but like there's room to play.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
So I have a question about what was your process teaching yourself how to write screenplays again, coming back into it? Like, were there unexpected challenges, and were some things easier?
It was easier, I think, than I was worried it might be. But I had been doing it for like, I had a good 10 years of working very, very hard at this. So when I jumped back in, I just I read another screenwriting book. That's Not the Way It Works by Bob Saenz, which is great, by the way. That's definitely worth reading if you're a newer writer, or even if you're not a newer writer. It's good. And I was listening to a bunch of screenwriting podcasts, and I read maybe 4 or 5 scripts and then just started going. But one thing that was really cool and interesting to me when I was doing that reentry series and interviewing all these pro writers was how many of them, it was just like instantly apparent that they're still very much students of the craft, despite being very successful. I think I had kind of felt like maybe I didn't need to go back and do that much studying or like read and break down scripts and whatnot. And I was very surprised and impressed and inspired by the fact that so many pro writers still do that regularly and are not above it. And so I was kind of like, oh, well, I guess I shouldn't be above it either. And so, I have made an effort to continue reading and studying and breaking things down.
In another interview you did, you were sort of talking about how you prioritize pacing a lot over maybe even like over considering structure. Could you maybe speak to that a little bit?
Yeah. So structure, it's good to understand the 3 act structure. And like, I think like, you can use things like Save the Cat's beat sheet or whatever pretty successfully. Many people have. But I care much, much more about things just being exciting and interesting, and much less about where certain plot points fall. So, as I'm outlining, which I usually do outline for screenplays anyway, I definitely know kind of what the ending is and what the transition from act 1 into act 2 is. And I've got a good idea of a midpoint where things really shift and change, and probably a really low point going into act 3. And then depending on the script, I might not have that much more than that, or I might have a whole lot more. It just depends on the project. But I try not to focus too much on hitting page numbers with that type of thing. I think that you can get into some real trouble there. If you want to hear from somebody who said it much better than I did, go check out episode 12 of the Reentry series that I did with Malcolm Spellman, where he really specifically talks about that and not writing the page count and why that can get you into so much trouble. But I completely agree with everything you said. I think, basically the issue is that if you try and write to page count and get things in at certain times, like you risk like leaving out really important elements of the story or the characters that are going to add so much depth to the script. And you can always, when you're rewriting, come back and like cut things later and trim and condense, but it's much harder to like add that depth in after the fact. So I really try not to think too much about that.
That totally makes sense. I just went ahead and shared a link to episode 12 if anybody wants to check that out later. Yeah.
So this is somewhat related, bringing up an older question related to pacing somewhat, I guess. Question, how do you avoid on-the-nose dialogue and add urgency stakes to your screenplay? That's a big question, but...
It is big. All right.
Yeah.
So let me start with on-the-nose dialogue. I think... First of all, sometimes like in a first draft, I do write on the nose dialogue, kind of knowing that I'm going to come back to that later. It's important just to kind of, I don't write vomit drafts. Like I try and get it good-ish, but I don't focus on it so much that I'll let that stop me from continuing to write. But like, I think avoiding on the nose dialogue is just really understanding your characters and where they're at emotionally. And so like, a lot of on the nose dialogue is somebody like you'll have a character explaining to another character something that they already know, and that like they would never actually have that conversation in real life, and they're just doing it for the audience's benefit so that the audience has some exposition and knows how to follow the story. But if you know where the characters are at emotionally and you're tracking that, you kind of instinctively know that just doesn't make sense. And so you find another way to get that exposition out there. And there are a billion ways to do it. And sometimes it's hard and you fight for it for a little while. But like, if you focus on the emotional state of the characters, that should help you avoid a lot of on the nose dialogue. And so understanding where they come from and kind of their backgrounds, but also just checking like, okay, at the beginning of the scene, like what are they feeling? Do that every time. I think that's so important to just ask those questions. And then what was the other part of that question again?
It was adding urgency and stakes to your screenplay.
Mm-hmm.
So I think this took me a while to figure out, but like stakes. So like in logline terms, like, you got to have bigger stakes and whatnot, I guess. But like in terms of making a scene feel urgent, it's just about how much the characters care. So like if a character really, really, really cares about, making pancakes and making them perfectly, you're going to feel that. It's going to come across as long as you set that up and like, how much that matters. Like think if you've seen The Bear, oh my God, like that didn't have to like be that way, but it's so intense the entire time, and the stakes feel so real and big because the characters care so much. So like you just have to give the characters reasons to care and make it obvious that they do, and it will feel urgent and the stakes will feel high. And I say that as somebody who writes things like that are life or death all the time, but like there are scenes that are not life or death, and they should still feel very important to the characters.
So this kind of you were speaking a lot about character development, and I'm kind of curious what your process is like for developing characters. Like how well do you know them before you start writing? Are you somebody who kind of writes and figures them out, or what's your approach to that?
Yeah, I wish I did more upfront work. You know, I do less than I probably should. I think I find my characters in my second draft a lot. I do make an effort to kind of like find out like what every character's got kind of a purpose in the story, right? And they've got a goal. Every character that matters should have something that they really want and stuff. And so I try and at least drill down before I start writing why they want that. Like, where is that coming from in their life? What happened in their life where that's really, really important to them? You know, a lot of times it's trauma related, which is just the case for humanity in general. Not always, but like trying to figure out like what is it that truly caused them to need that thing and want that thing is incredibly helpful to getting to that emotional state that I was talking about earlier. You know, but I do find my characters in my second draft a lot. Like that's kind of where they start to feel more authentic.
In Adam speak, you figure out what their damage is. That's
yeah.
What's their damage? Yeah, for sure.
So here's another question. What's the best advice you've ever gotten? What's the worst advice you've ever gotten?
Oh man.
I want to hear the worst advice.
That's a hard question to answer because it's like the advice can be so different, and it can mean something different on a different day. But like, you know, I think, well, and it also depends. Is it like writing advice or is it career advice, right? So in terms of career, I think like just, you know, embracing that it's a long-term thing and knowing that it's kind of it's a game of attrition, it's a war of attrition, and the people who tend to stick it out tend to be the ones who succeed. I think that's good to keep in mind. But as far as writing advice, the best advice, I don't know. That's so hard.
What's the worst advice?
I think the worst advice is anything that tries to get you too focused on silly formatting things and scaring you that people are going to toss out a script because of them. You know, it's almost become a joke for anybody who's on Twitter. It has become a joke, but like about like bolded slug lines or whatever, like nobody really cares if you bold your slug lines or if you don't like that. The idea of being scared that somebody's going to toss out your script over that is ridiculous. You know, if your writing is excellent, it's going to be apparent on page one. And if your writing is excellent, nobody's going to toss your script because you have some creative formatting or whatever.
But you are in favor of bolding your slug lines, right?
I bold my slug lines, absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean,
better.
I mess with formatting on purpose sometimes just because I think just to be a punk in the face of that mentality. So, you know, like use a screenwriting program so that your margins are right and your dialogue is in the right place, and then don't worry about it. You know, focus on the story is all that matters. The writing is all that matters. Being interesting is what matters. And if you can do that, that's all that's going to matter in terms of readers. So, you know, there might be like contests and things that actually score based on formatting. And so, yeah, maybe you could get dinged a little bit there. But in terms of like contests are not the business. In terms of actual Hollywood, nobody's going to care about that.
So
sorry.
I was like, out of curiosity. So if you had somebody come to you tomorrow and said like, hey, Nathan, I've never done this. I want to get into screenwriting. What do I do? what would be your advice to them?
I mean, so I think the first thing I would try and do is like drill down. Do they really want to do this? Because I think that the weird thing about screenwriting, and there aren't that many art forms that are like this, is like your art is never finished unless the movie gets made. It isn't. And like a lot of, I think why we create art is like it's a way to connect with humanity and connect with an audience. And an unfinished screenplay never has an opportunity to do that. Or sorry, an unproduced screenplay never has an opportunity to do that, except for like among fellow writers who maybe want to read it or whatever. Anybody else who reads your screenplay is trying to make money from it, so it's not an artistic audience anyway. So like that's a really, really hard thing to deal with, especially when it takes most people many, many years to get anything produced. And when you start out, it's really easy to believe that you're going to be the exception to that, and kind of ignore the fact that there are probably a couple million people trying to do the same thing that you are. But it takes most people an incredibly long time. So like the first thing I would want to talk about is just like, is this really what you want to do? Because if you just love writing, go write something. Go write a novel or a short story. And if you love movies, there are many other ways to be involved in movies that maybe won't be so soul-sucking and soul-crushing for so long before, anything actually hits. So that's where I would start. However, if you definitely still want to do it, then my advice would be to, I don't know, get a book, listen to a couple podcasts, and just start writing, and have fun with it. And go all in and take big swings, and just keep at it daily and figure out who you are as a writer and what your voice is, and connect with other writers along the way, because you're going to want people to not only read your work, but just to commiserate with, honestly. That's really important.
So say this person now comes back to you and they have a script and they're like, I feel excellent about this script. What do I do now? What would you advise them?
I think, just as I said, like connecting with other writers is so critical, and it's so easy to do now with all of these resources online. Find other writers who are in the same place that you are and swap scripts with them. Give them feedback and do the best possible job you can with it, and they'll do the same for you. And if you're brand new, the feedback may not be like top quality, but that's okay, because you're both just learning right now anyway, and you're building connections with other people. And if you do this, let's say you give feedback to 20 writers in the space of a year, 3 or 4 of those might keep doing it for the next few years, and those will kind of become your circle of friends. And if you keep doing this regularly, that circle of friends will grow larger and larger, because you'll meet more people, and some of them eventually will have success, and suddenly you'll find that you know pro writers because you've been friends with them for 6 or 7 years, and you've been trading scripts, and now you're getting feedback from pro writers. And that's how it happened for me, and that's how it happens for many, many other people. Before I got repped, I simply had a lot of friends who were writers, and some of them were really, really, really good, and are still really, really good. And some of them actually had some real success. And having that insight and seeing what they experienced firsthand, just because we were good friends, was invaluable. And so you have to start early, I think, with just kind of building that network. And it's as easy as swapping scripts with each other and giving each other feedback.
That's something you still do, isn't it? I think you mentioned it in another video. Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I give feedback at least like once a month to a random writer that I don't know. And I was doing that through Twitter, and now I'll do it through YouTube. And I have, my own circle of friends that we trade scripts all the time. So I probably read, still 3 or 4 scripts a month, easy, just in terms of giving feedback to people.
That's awesome. And I'm going to link your YouTube here. So that is Nathan's YouTube channel. So everyone be sure to go over there and hit subscribe and check out what he's doing there, by the way. Here we go.
We
Go
have
ahead.
two related industry questions, which we can combine. What are the unspoken rules of navigating the industry that an outsider might not be privy to? And any networking tips?
All right. So let's talk about unspoken rules.
It's very
I
specific.
think since they're unspoken, they're not necessarily rules. But like, what I would say is, don't do everything you can just to not come off as desperate. That's always going to rub people the wrong way. There are just so many people who want to do this. And even though, if we're being honest, we've all been there. We've all felt desperate at one time or another if we've been doing this for long enough. But like, it's such a turnoff to people when like they have so many people who want things from them. So just don't come off that way. If you have an opportunity to connect with people, don't make it about you and don't immediately ask them to read your script. Just connect. Before I kind of like broke in the first time, I really kind of had this idea that like all these producers and executives and reps were just these super high power people. Sure, they have power or whatever, but like they're also movie geeks who love movies and they want to make movies and they want to make good movies. And like, we're all kind of in this together, and most of them are really, really cool people. And they're normal people. And so, if you just go into it just looking to make friends and connect with people on that level, it's much easier to navigate the industry because, you just have a connection that's not based on some kind of gross thing that you need from each other.
Mm-hmm.
And that I guess that would be my networking tip as well. Just treat people like people.
That was something that we had a guest, Octavia Klahar, came on, and she was saying that her go-to move has been asking people to coffee and saying, I'd love to read one of your scripts. So sort of, instead of pushing her scripts on people, asking for their script has gotten her a lot of.
I'm sure. I think that's brilliant. Like I said on Twitter, like I think at the end of 2020, I tweeted out like, if you want to like really grow as a writer next year, once a week, read a script from another writer and give them the best notes you can without asking for anything in return. And if you do that, at the end of the year, you'll have met 52 new writers. You'll have read and broken down and given notes on 52 scripts. And most of them probably won't be that good, but that's okay because you're still thinking through story and you're thinking through challenges. By the end of that year, your craft will level up like crazy, but also so will your network. Out of 52 writers, a few of them will be good writers for sure, if not more. And, that's going to be invaluable to you down the line, both of those things. So, I mean, I think that's great, right? Inviting people out to coffee and offering to read a script, it's huge.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. We have this interesting question from Theo that I'd love to pull up. So which lessons have you learned from the production process that you applied to new screenplays?
One thing is that like this idea, I just realized that like when you write a spec script, you're not writing the movie. You are writing a document that is like a sales pitch for how cool the movie could be. And so like, it's a little bit freeing in the sense that like, I know that there is no such thing as a perfect scene. I just have to keep it really fun and really interesting the entire time and really engaging. There's no such thing as a perfect scene because notes will come in and logistics will come in and reality will come in and you will need to like rewrite it anyway. That's just what's going to happen. The movie's going to, if the movie gets made, it's going to change. So like, don't worry necessarily about like getting every single thing perfect. Just focus on keeping it like really fun and interesting and engaging the entire time. And that's what matters. And if that passion is there and the concept is there, that's all you need to worry about. One other actually interesting thing, this is a little more technical, and this was a learning for me, was I was asked, again, on the lines of like things will change. to take this character that we had and turn her into a 25-page character. And so what that meant was like they measure pages for actors based on eighths of a page. And so if that actor is present for an eighth of a page, they count it as an eighth. And they don't have to say anything, they don't have to do anything, they just have to be on screen. And so you'll like, if you're present on 3/8 of page 1 and 5/8 of page 2, they're a 1-page actor. So they asked me to turn this character that was like a 19-page actor into a 25-page actor so that they could get a bigger actor to take that part and just make it work financially. And that was a really, really interesting experience and kind of has made me think about that on subsequent drafts of other scripts. Like, okay, you know, does this person have a meaty enough role where we could really fill them with a, you know, named star and, you know, give the movie a better shot at getting made. So that was interesting. But
that's really cool.
What's that?
How did you approach that edit out of curiosity?
So, you know, I was able to bring that character in, like, and have them take part in a couple other scenes that were already there. So I didn't have to add too much. Mostly I just kind of had to like move things around and have them show up differently or whatever. And then I knew that it might not be immediately apparent that she really was a 25-page actor. So then after that, I went through and I counted through it myself and made a spreadsheet and sent that along with the rewrite so that they knew that it was good to go. Because I felt really confident in that rewrite. And so, yeah, we went with it that way. But that was cool. I wouldn't worry about that on a first draft, but I think it's useful as you go through rewrites to think, you know, do I have somebody who's potentially a big star here, but like they just don't quite have a meaty enough role yet. And if I get them on 5 more pages, that could make a big difference. So anyway.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, it's a more technical thing. And I don't know that not doing that would prevent you from having an opportunity to sell it or whatever. But certainly it helps in terms of getting something made.
What are some other interesting or surprising, you probably can't be super specific, but any like surprising notes that you've gotten, or just, like, just kind of speaking to notes in general? So
one thing that was a really great moment for me with the first one, the one that just got made, was like the first round of notes. We were having a call about it, and you know, whenever you get notes, like you take them respectfully and whatever, but you also like want to be an advocate for the story. And I was kind of pushing back on one of the notes and saying why, and I must have just made it apparent that I felt like, you know, their goal here was to make the movie more commercial, which is certainly a goal. But like, and the producer was like, whoa, hold on. Like, we still want to make like a really good movie here. And that was like, I was so glad that he said that. And it was like, all right, we're all on the same team here. Like, we're just trying to make a great movie. And we're also just trying to make a movie, which means it needs to be commercial to some extent. It needs to sell. But I really appreciated that. And I think that was very helpful for me going forward, and gave me some confidence in terms of the other rewrites and helped me to like kind of hold myself to a high standard rather than say, oh, they just want to make this and make money off of it. And it doesn't really matter whether it's good or not. So that was cool. And I have found that to be true of all the other people I've worked with since. And, you know, I'm working on 2 other movies right now. I mean, people in this business, for the most part, are in it because they love movies. They want to make good movies. And so I've had an opportunity to work with some really cool people and learn from them and get other perspectives. And that's been very cool.
That's awesome. So let's see. I guess since we're kind of coming up on the end of time, I'm curious if, just for fun, if you've seen anything lately that you just absolutely loved. Any shows or movies, anything?
It's been a good year for movies, I feel like. You know what's interesting? I never really considered myself that much of a horror fan before, but the last couple of years, there's so much good horror coming out. Like, I just thought Barbarian was so interesting and unique. The Black Phone was fantastic. Smile was genuinely scary. You know, that's pretty cool. I loved Everything Everywhere All at Once.
Yeah.
What else? Just watched The Mauritanian, which I really liked a lot on streaming. I think it's on Paramount Plus. So I don't know. I love movies. I can go on and make a list for a really long time.
Awesome. Adam, did you have any more questions for us?
No, thanks so much, Nathan, for joining us. This was a great talk. It was really great to hear your point of view, and I think everybody really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I hope it was helpful. Thanks for having me. This is really fun.
Well, thank you so much.
Alexi, what do we got going next week?
So next week, I need to remember. I was so excited about this week that my whole brain is kind of focused.
Oh, we don't have it. That's fine.
That. No, next week we're talking about what medium is right for your story. We're talking about movies and TV and kind of figuring out which one of those your story falls into. So I hope everyone will check that out. And don't forget to subscribe to Nathan's YouTube channel. We have the link in the comments. And the
Young Screenwriters channel.
Yes, us too.
Yeah, don't forget us. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you. Have a good one.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.